A strange smell in this house leads to a horrifying discovery. Neighbors in a tiny village in Toliara, Madagascar were taken aback by a rancid smell that was coming from a vacant house in a neighborhood. They tried ignoring the stench at first. When the smell became too overwhelming, they decided to contact the authorities. But no one could have imagined what was lurking inside the home. At first, the villagers couldn't identify where the smell was coming from, but it was growing stronger every day, and yet nobody wanted to accuse a fellow neighbor. But eventually the smell got so bad that everyone banded together and realized the stench was coming from an abandoned house. But what could they do about it? Now that they knew where the smell was coming from, they had to find a way to get inside. But it would have been illegal to enter the two-story house, so they considered calling the cops at first. But they feared the authorities would ignore them over such a silly issue. Then they considered reporting the house as overrun to the city, but something happened that stopped them from calling anyone. The villagers never imagined anyone would willingly live in that neglected house, but then they noticed people coming and going from the house. They were glad they hadn't called the cops or stormed in, and eventually the smell went away, which allowed the neighbors to mind their own business for a while. But the worst was yet to come. That foul stench returned with a vengeance, forcing the neighbors to get together and discuss what actions they needed to take. This time, they all agreed they had to call the police. They told authorities that the smell had started to concern them, but the officers had their own theory of what could be causing that rancid stench. The cops took a closer look at the mysterious house. They even brought along some of the neighbors to guide them, but they had no idea what to expect, so they brought a wildlife expert and medical examiner along too. Would these so-called experts be capable of handling what they were about to face? Sori Randrian was a member of the Wildlife Committee and also head of the agency that was called in to assist the cops. The department was often involved in cases that dealt with foul-smelling homes. But when she heard about the house, she decided to investigate it personally. Coincidentally, her home was in the area. She even had her own theory on what could be causing the smell. But she was completely wrong. The home was located in the city of Toliara on the southwest coast of Madagascar. The village was a peaceful and beautiful place, which is why the cops doubted the smell was caused by foul play. So instead, they called Randrian, because they thought the stench was most likely caused by wildlife. The Environment Agency had been around for a while, and they have seen tons of incidents involving animals. In fact, they had dealt with anywhere from harmless kittens to ferocious predators. It's why the cops were glad they came along. But what was lurking inside would end up stumping the experts too. When they arrived at the house, they couldn't put a name to the stench. Even Randrian herself was puzzled as she prepared to walk in. She had dealt with different situations, but this one was really weird, and no one was entirely sure what they would find inside the house. Aside from the odious stench coming from within, the home's exterior looked relatively normal. But it was difficult to see what dark secrets lurked inside. There were no sounds coming from inside either. They couldn't help but wonder why the house was abandoned in the first place. As far as they knew, the house wasn't on sale, so what was this home hiding? When cops stepped inside, the stench was so powerful that it made them feel lightheaded. But they fought through the regurgitating stench and headed deeper into the unknown. Randrian suspected that it could have been animal waste, but where were the animals? Randrian was almost sure that only a trapped animal could produce such an overwhelming smell. That being said, she wasn't ruling out the possibility that people could be lurking inside too. But she still had a lot of questions, and she was about to get the answers she was looking for. As they made their way through the property, they heard a noise that left everyone paralyzed with fear. It hadn't been too loud, but everyone heard it. As they continued walking through the house, they remained vigilant. And as it turned out, there were two people inside the property, and they were in a state of shock. This left the cops and the experts even more puzzled than they were before. The other people had shovels in their hands, as they were clearly digging holes, but they were surrounded by various other objects too. The team had no idea what to do next. Not only was the house occupied, but the people living inside were suspiciously digging holes. When cops asked them what they were doing, the strangers started behaving oddly. They were obviously hiding something. When the cops got even closer, they dropped their shovels, but the team still had no idea why they were acting like they had just committed a crime. It would have been pointless to struggle with the police, so the diggers put their hands up. The puzzled cops followed protocol and arrested them, but then they went back into the house to see what the diggers were trying to hide, even if that meant dealing with the stench. Then, the ground moved. Once the cops took another look at the rooms, it became clear that the house was completely destroyed. There were no lights. The ceilings and windows had cobwebs on them, but they were still trying to look for the source of the smell. Then they felt the floor move. But after getting over the initial shock, they finally realized what the source was. The team looked down at their feet and were horrified to discover that the whole floor was covered in tortoises. Randrian realized these weren't your run-of-the-mill tortoises. She had no idea where they came from, though, but she knew they were in trouble. Randrian knew that she needed to relocate the tortoises to a safer location. These creatures had been treated horribly, and she feared many of them would not survive. But every second the tortoises remained behind put their lives in greater jeopardy. Randrian discovered that the tortoises were a rare species indigenous to Madagascar known as the radiated tortoises. They're very docile and have unique markings on their shells. Suddenly, she realized why the people they had arrested had so many of them. Some criminals poach these creatures because they're extremely rare. Others eat them as a rare delicacy, while others keep them as pets. But it's against the law to own, steal, or illegally sell these tortoises because their mistreatment has led to their near extinction. The authorities rescued 9,888 tortoises from the house. They debated whether to return them to the wild or have them live out their lives in a facility. Unfortunately, one facility couldn't look after all of them, so they had to make a very tough call. Unfortunately, the tortoises had spent most of their lives living in deplorable conditions, so returning them to the wild would have put them at risk of being caught by poachers or dying from the elements. So, the team came up with a more life-saving alternative. The tortoises have a team dedicated to giving them the attention and care they deserve. They make sure they get food, water, and love. And with 9,888 tortoises, the researchers started looking for ways to increase the population's numbers. 3 people responsible for hoarding these defenseless turtles, 2 men and a woman, received long prison sentences, which also sent a message to anyone who might be doing something similar to other animals. If you hold creatures in a confined space, you'll end up in a confined space yourself.
Thanks for watching another heartwarming video. Please check out our channel for more stories that will make your heart melt.